Over the last couple of months here in our evening gatherings, we've been thinking about what it means to be a community of grace, to be a community that is shaped by God's grace, God's undeserved love towards us. And we're carrying on with that tonight. And tonight, I've been given the task of exploring how being part of a community of grace makes us missional. How the grace poured into our lives as individuals and as a community leads us into the world to declare Jesus, to proclaim Jesus into the world. And I want to do that by looking at two stories that involve the disciples in the Gospels. One right at the very beginning of the Gospels and one right at the end of the Gospels. So if you have a Bible, either an electronic one or a paper one, then do open it or open up your app and we will read the Bible together. Actually, it's quite handy because we're looking at the first chapter of Mark and the last chapter of Matthew, which means if you have a paper Bible, they're actually probably on the same page, which is very exciting. So we're starting in Mark chapter 1 and looking at verses 16 to 20. This is the calling of some of the disciples. This is them getting their invitation from Jesus, and we're going to examine what that looked like. And then we're going to see what he said as his parting words to send them out into the world. So in Mark 1, chapter 1, verse 16. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father, Zebedee, in the boat with the hired men, and followed him. Very simple passage, very, very, very simple passage. Jesus comes, he says, "Follow me." He tells them very briefly what that'll look like, and they do. And they leave behind their old life, and they come and follow him. This is a very simple passage, and I think when we read it at face value, it makes a lot of sense. But there's an awful lot more that we can understand when we know a little bit about the day that Jesus lived in, and the way that Jewish children, Jewish boys particularly, were educated and schooled. Little bit of history for you. Bear with me. Jewish boys, when they turned about 5, at that point they were deemed ready to receive and hear the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And so their education began. And they would learn portions of it. And they would be taught about what it meant. But mostly it was a case of memorizing, becoming familiar with all of those parts of the Old Testament. And then by the age of about 10, they were expected to basically know it. They're expected to know that bit. And if they'd sort of made the mark and they demonstrated that they'd understood it well enough, then they would go on to their next stage of education. Between about the age of 10 and 13, 14, 15, they would learn the rest of the Old Testament. And they would grapple with that, and they would try and understand that. And if after that they still proved to be a good student who'd learnt the right things and could engage with things at the right level, then they would start to learn some of the conversations and the debates and the traditions that had grown up around those passages. So this person had said this about it, and that person had said that. And after a while, if their education was still going well, a lot of people by this point have dropped out because they didn't quite make it. If they were doing well, they would. At that point, a rabbi would be the next thing that they would want to have. So they would find a rabbi, a teacher, someone to go and learn from, to follow around, to be their follower. They would go up to them and say, "Can you lead me? Can I be your follower? Can I learn from you?" And the rabbi would think about it, and they'd go away and they'd work out, and they'd find out a bit about this person. What kind of education have they had? Who have they learnt from? Do I think they're a good candidate? And if they were, then they would say, "Yeah, come and follow me." At any point along the way, if you didn't quite make the cut, what did you do? Went and learnt your father's trade. Became a craftsman, became a whatever it was, became a butcher, became a fisherman. So what Jesus is doing is something that's very remarkable. Because what Peter and James and John and Simon, and Andrew in this story have learned at some point is, you've not made the cut. You've not made the grade. You're not worth teaching anymore. You're not worth investing in anymore. There are other people that are going to get far more from our education. And so actually you can just go off and do your own thing. Go and learn to be fishermen. It was all right for your dad, it'll be all right for you. And instead of, so the idea of them ever having a teacher, them ever having a rabbi and a master that they could follow around would have been unthinkable to them. They never met, they never got to that stage. So they would never go up to someone and say, can you lead me? Can I be one of your followers? And so no one would ever turn to them and say, follow me. Jesus doesn't wait for them to ask. Jesus just marches straight up to them and says, follow me. This invitation from a rabbi that they thought they would never get. This invitation from someone who wanted to share his life with them, to teach them something. They thought they'd never get it. And Jesus just gives it. Not because of anything special about them. Not because they'd proven themselves exceptional, but because he cared about them. Because he loved them and he wanted to invest in them. And so, in some ways, it's hardly any wonder that they immediately left their nets. This was the chance they never thought they would get. And now they're getting it. And so they immediately leave their nets. Why do I share all of that? Because this first encounter that Jesus has with his disciples is an act of grace. This isn't about them being good enough. This isn't about them being exceptional or being clever or being bright or being a standout person. This is about them just being an ordinary person. In fact, someone who flunked out at some point. And Jesus coming and saying, I don't care about that. I want you to be my follower. I want you to be close to me. And here's the thing. That's what Jesus has done with me and with you, if you know him. Don't ever think that Jesus chose you to be his follower because you were exceptional, because you were gifted, because you were great, because you were popular, because you were wealthy, because you were any... Jesus didn't choose you for any of those reasons. Jesus chose you because he loves you. Sometimes in spite of who you are and in spite of the kind of person you've been. This whole calling from Jesus to his disciples is an act of grace. He pulls them out from being, in the world's eyes, nobodies and gives them an identity just because he wants to and just because he believes that there's something in them, even if no one else sees it. But this act of grace in calling them to him is tied up with a calling for them to share this with other people. What is it he says in verse 17? Jesus said to them, follow me and I will make you fish for people. In the same breath, Jesus says, follow me. I want you to be my follower because I think you're worth something. And I'm going to help you to help reach other people with me. You can't have one without the other. Jesus doesn't say, come and follow me, and if you fancy it later on, maybe we'll tell a few other people as well. Jesus doesn't say, okay, come along, and if you turn out to be good enough, if you turn out to be a good student, then you can share me with other people. He says, no, come along, and I'm going to make you fish for people. And immediately, they abandon their nets, they abandon their trade, they leave their father behind with the hired men and follow him. This call to follow Jesus is a call to abandon themselves. It's a call to abandon everything that they've known up to this point for Jesus and for other people. So right here at the very beginning of their story with Jesus, he's calling them to look to other people. He's saying, look, you didn't get into my club because you're impressive. So maybe you should not look at other people and say they're not worth coming and joining as well. He's saying, look, everyone else gets in with the same ticket you do, which is that I love them. Right off the bat, Jesus is asking them to look to other people and offer them the same grace that they have received from him. I think that's really cool. I think it's really challenging, but I think it's really cool. So that's the beginning of their story. And then they have a roller coaster ride of 3 years. They see healings, they see miracles, they see demons thrown out, they see all kinds of things happen. They see Jesus arrested, they see him put on trial, they see him killed, they see him rise again. And then he has some more words for them. So at this point, they've journeyed with their master for a very long time. And at the end of Matthew, Jesus shares what has become known as the Great Commission. In Matthew 28, starting at verse 16. We read this. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. That's the command to the disciples. And that's the command to us. These people who've been drawn to Jesus because of who he is, not because of who they are. These people are now to go and make disciples of all nations, to go and share him everywhere, to go and tell everyone about him and to see people drawn to him. And then to follow that up by helping them to live the life of faith. It's about having an other-focused view of faith. Saying this isn't about me. It wasn't about me when I became a Christian. It was about Jesus, and it's still not about me. It's still about Jesus, and it's still about reaching others with his grace and with his love. And so we have this command, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded. But this command, which could be read, if that was all Jesus said here, it could be read as, okay, I called you not because you were impressive, but we've had 3 years, now you've got it. You're all fine now. You've got it, you've learned everything, you've made it, I've taught you everything I know, now you can just go out and do it. Use all the tools I've given you. You've got it. You're sorted. That's not what Jesus says. Instead, this command is sandwiched by 2 promises. Because before he says, go therefore and make disciples, he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. He's not saying, you've now got the power, now go and use it. He's saying, all authority has been given to me. And I'm the one sending you out. And then afterwards, he says, and remember, I am with you always to the very end of the age. What he's saying is, there is this huge task for you to get involved in. To go and share me with the rest of the world. With words, with actions, with everything you've got at your disposal. Go and share me with the rest of the world. But don't think you can do it by yourself. You weren't called to me because you're impressive. And you're not going to reach the world because you're impressive. You were called to me because I love you and because I want to be with you. And you're going to reach the world because I have all of the power and because I will be going with you. That's the way we should read this passage. This isn't about relying on ourselves and thinking we've got it, we've made it. Sure, maybe we needed grace to become Christians. Maybe we needed God's undeserved love to start this journey. But now we're here. We can go it by ourselves. We can do it all by ourselves. We've got it. We've learnt it all. We should never think that way, because even this command to go and reach other people is tied up with, but keep relying on me. He knows that we still don't have all the answers. We still wouldn't pass that education. We're still going to flunk out from time to time. But he goes with us. So, in being called, it was an act of grace, and we need to be constantly relying on God's grace as we seek to reach other people. How sad would it be if, having received that grace and received that love, we just wanted to keep it to ourselves? When we've got leaflets at the back inviting people to hear about what Jesus has done, are we content just to have them sit there? Or do we want to share them with people? And that's just about inviting people to a service, which is great, that's a good thing, but That's not what sharing Jesus with the world looks like. It looks like so many things. It looks like noticing someone when no one else does, just like Jesus did with the disciples. It looks like telling someone they have value when they've never been told that before, or maybe if they have, they've never really believed it. It's about giving someone your time, not because you think you can get something back from them, but because they're worth it. It is about sharing our faith with words and telling people what we believe about Jesus, knowing that the gospel has power to convict and to transform and to draw people to Jesus. It's a big call. It's never one we should do by ourselves. But what I find most remarkable about this passage is in verse 17 of Matthew 28. Before he's given them the command, when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. It's those people that Jesus calls. People who are worshipping him, but who also have doubts and questions and weaknesses and frailties. Jesus doesn't wait until they've got it all sewn up and then say, okay, now you've got everything sorted, go. He knows they've got doubts. He knows they've got questions. A lot of stuff has just happened and they don't really get it all. And yet it's while they still have those doubts that he sends them out. Don't ever think that your doubts or your questions or your weaknesses disqualify you from being used by God to reach other people. Don't ever think that. In fact, they qualify you because they are what is going to constantly drive you back to Jesus, constantly drive you back to the one who has been given all power by God and who will be with you to the very end of the age. It's his great commission and he is going to achieve it. He wants to use you to do that. It's going to be harder to use you if you're arrogant. It's going to be harder to use you if you forget how much grace you needed. Charles Spurgeon said that we should never share the gospel in any other way than as one beggar telling another beggar where he found some bread. That's all I am. I'm not more impressive and more special and better than anybody else. I'm just as weak, just as broken. But I found Jesus. And if I share the gospel ever in any way other than that, it's not going to have its power because I've forgotten about grace. If I start to talk about my own achievements and the things that I've done and the stuff that I do and who I've become and the transformation in my life in a way that sounds like I'm talking about me being cool and me being good, it's just going to make people think, well, okay, but I'm not like that. Are we quicker to talk about our strengths and our achievements than we are our failures? If that's the case, then are people seeing grace at work in our lives? Or are people seeing us putting on a brave face or a mask? When we want someone to know who Jesus is, we need to make sure they can see that Jesus' grace is still at work in our life. It wasn't just at work when God called us. It wasn't just at work the times that we were going through a particularly difficult patch. We need to be constantly throwing ourselves back onto the grace of God, remembering how much we need him, remembering that we still can't go it alone, and we never will. We're a community forged by grace, a community drawn together by an undeserved love. And it's as that community that we have the opportunity to reach the world. As long as we stay focused on Jesus and focused on the grace he's given us, we have something to offer to the world. As soon as we lose that, we've got nothing to give. We're just a group of people who meet together on a Sunday. Josh is going to come and sing a song over us as we prepare to take communion, as we prepare to remember by eating and drinking what it is Jesus has done for us. And I'm going to ask us to do that in a slightly different way. As Josh sings, there is bread and there is wine here. One of the blessings of being slightly smaller in number tonight, apparently a lot of people have gone off to spring harvest, is that we can do things in a slightly more movement-y way and we can be a bit freer with things. So there's bread and there's wine. We don't have people who are going to come round and serve you. We don't have people who are going to be stood at the front for you to come to. Instead, if I've received grace in exactly the same way as you, then neither of us is more qualified or less qualified to give communion to someone else. Let's get in the practice of reminding one another of the grace that we've received by giving people symbols of Jesus' sacrifice, of his body broken and his blood poured out. So, in your own time, as Josh sings over us, and then as we continue to worship together, come take some bread. Take it over to someone. Take it over to someone and say something like, Jesus died for you because he loves you. And then maybe they'll want to take it on to someone else, or maybe you'll come and put it back and someone else will get it. And for the next however long, we'll remind each other of God's grace. We will be that community forged by grace, by speaking it over one another, by offering it to one another as bread and as wine. We'll take as long as we take. If you're upstairs, feel free to come down. Maybe we'll come up to you. Doesn't matter. Father God, I thank you that this table presents a level playing field. That this table reminds us of how little we did to earn your love. And reminds us of how much you did to show us yours. So as we eat and as we drink, would you, Lord, drive us back to grace? And as we eat and as we drink, would you fill us up with the strength we need and the passion and the excitement we need to spur us on, that others may see your love as well.